Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton.
And I'm Robin.
And we're here to discuss Torah portion Korach. And though it's pronounced Korach, we're going to just say Korah like most Bibles pronounce it. And this is found in Numbers chapter 16, 17, and 18. And boy, is there a lot going on here. Oh, and just a note too. I'm reading from a Hebrew Bible, and Robin, you're using an English Bible.
Right.
And this is one of those places where the verse numbers in the Hebrew Bible and the English Bible don't quite match up.
So we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Oh, and where it's at, just to give you a heads up, in the Hebrew Bible, chapter 16 ends with verse 35, whereas the English Bible has 50 verses in that chapter. But what is chapter 16, verse 36 in the English Bible is chapter 17, verse 1 in the Hebrew Bible.
So the
reason they're all there. All the verses
saying
are
that
there.
is if I refer to something and it doesn't match up with
Right.
Grant, we'll adjust it.
Yeah, just keep fiddling around.
Right.
You'll find where we're at.
Well, Grant, as we begin this this talk together about this portion of God's holy Torah, I think about a friend of mine who often said, Robin, if our lives were recorded in the Bible for other people to read, what would it look like? And if I had an entire portion named after me, my goodness, I would hope that people would walk away being inspired and not being warned. Right,
exactly.
And we walk away from Korah being warned.
Yes.
And he epitomized just a lack of humility.
Right.
He had such a problem with jealousy, and it destroyed not only him, but many, many, many other people around him. And it brought damage to the entire congregation. So I guess for those who don't know the story, let's jump in.
Yeah. Well, Korah, it struck me is just a few minutes before we started, we were discussing it, is that Korah, he was a big shot in Israel and among the Israelites. He led 250 men who are all men of renown, men of name. And he was one who's called to meeting. In other words, he was a leader. He was of the Kohath family and Levi, the same family that Moses and Aaron belonged to. So, I mean, he's a big deal. So the question is, why haven't we heard of him before?
Well, I think, too, the point is just because someone has a big following, we can't assume that what they're teaching is good and right.
Yeah. Somehow I get this feeling, though Korah is mentioned a couple times early in Exodus, just in the family tree, but no action or words are recorded. This is just my imagination, I kind of picture Korah as one of these guys who's kind of full of himself, and every time something goes wrong and Moses does something that the people don't like, Korah just stays a little aloof and looks down his nose, and people might think, well, what do you think of that, Korah? Well, it's not the way I would do it. You know, one of those people. And he just wants to appear as if he's above everything else.
But the whole time really attracting other souls
The whole time.
to listen.
Yes. And so now, after the Israelites are told, okay, you can't go into the land flowing with milk and honey, you're all going to die here in the wilderness, you're going to spend the next 40 years
Suddenly
here.
it's not their fault.
Yeah. It's like Korah began to smell blood in the water.
Well, I think it's important to realize that any circumstance that comes into our life doesn't create a reaction or a response. It exposes the soul that we
does.
have. It exposes what's brewing under the surface, doesn't it?
It does. And you look at the blindness of these people. We were just talking about it. The way they describe Moses' failures.
Well, let's read. Can I read verse 3?
Sure. Yes. Let's start there.
That. Yeah, because you're jumping ahead.
I
and
am.
And I want to give people
Rein me in,
the
woman.
context.
Rein me in.
They assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone far enough. For all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourself above the assembly of the Lord?" Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So they took action. They gathered a crowd. They confronted him with these accusations, these hateful accusations. And there's no humility in their approach to him, is there?
No, none at all.
And Grant, one of the things that you and I have been discussing, because we do try to kind of discuss the principles of these portions before we sit down, even though we don't know the details of what we're going to talk about. But the thing we've agreed on is that arrogance and fear always leads to irrational behavior.
It does.
And you suddenly lose your way.
Yeah.
But what I noticed is Moses' response, because as we just mentioned, the true character of a person is exposed when they are confronted with a situation.
That's for sure.
And so he's confronted with this situation, and verse 4 says, when Moses heard this, what did he do, Grant? He fell on his face. He fell on his face because he knew his place. He, in humility, cast himself before the Lord. Yeah. And he says, how about if we do this? Tomorrow morning, the Lord will show who he is.
Yeah.
In other words, I'm not going to defend God to you. Yeah. Let's let God speak for himself.
Yeah.
That is the sign of a humble, wise man.
You know, Korah is also the epitome of a soulish man. He could never see God in any situation, but Moses, he falls on his face when this happens because he saw God in every situation. He sees what Korah is doing. He hears what he and his followers are saying.
And he doesn't absorb the insult and suddenly lose his own way. He sees the truth, and he sees Korah's accusations in light of the truth. And that is hard to maintain.
He sees it in the context of who God is.
Exactly.
And he knows that what Korah is doing is something that God hates. But Korah couldn't see that. And, you know, the faithless spies, they went across, they came back with some facts. They completely missed the truth. They compared the situation with their own strength. But Joshua and Caleb, they compared the situation with God's strength. Mm-hmm. The spiritual man always sees every situation in the context of who God is. Korah was incapable of that.
And our ego is in check when we understand who God is. And as Moses, we fall on our face before him. Define ego. We were defining this together and reviewing, because really that's our enemy, isn't it?
It is. Well, the word ego is a Greek word, ego, which is the Greek word for I, me, myself, I. That's just you see it all through the New Testament. Wherever someone says I, it's the word ego. And in Hebrew, it's the word ani. And but the word ego has come to represent not the real me, but the me I want to project to the world. One rabbi refers to the ego as the phantom soul. In other words, we don't want people to see the real me. We want people to see this version of me that I want to project to the world. Yes, right. But that version is a lie. That version is Satan himself in my life, because it's all a falsehood. This is why a humble person, a little child, has no ego. When you see a truly humble person, you see a little child, you see it all. That's who they are. And I think of truly humble people, and I know I always use my mom for this. She's a truly humble person. When you met her, you met the real Edna Luton. You didn't meet some false, fake projection of what she wanted you to think. Different personas. She was herself.
Right.
And so what we want to do is project something different from who we are.
We think we're missing out. We think we're protecting ourselves from loss. And I've learned, Grant, over the years, that the message, the voice of the ego into our mind is always more. You don't have enough. You're not going to have enough. You need to take more. And I was thinking of that when I was reading further down in chapter 16. Now, in my Bible, in my English Bible, it is verse 8 and 9. When Moses says to Korah, he says, listen, you sons of Levi, is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle and to stand and to minister on behalf of the God? That's not enough. No, it wasn't enough.
Yeah. Well, here's what's interesting. In verse 3, says, they gathered together against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, Rav lachem, it is too much for you. Now that's what it says in the Hebrew. Rav lachem.
In other words,
it's too much for you.
Let us help you.
Yeah. But what's interesting, though, this is what they say to Moses and Aaron. If you go over to verse 7, Moses speaks to them and says, well, I'll pick it up at the beginning. And put fire in your fire pans, place incense upon them before Adonai tomorrow. Then the man whom Adonai will choose, he is the Holy One. It is Rav Lechem. It is too much for you, O offspring of Levi. So they're saying, this is too much for you to do. They came across as like they want to serve Moses and Aaron. But they didn't want to serve. You know, in their statement, they really reveal who they are. In verse 3, they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. Now listen to what they said. You have gone too far. The truth is, Korah and his followers are going too far. For all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Adonai is among them. And what they're really saying is, we are not really holy. We're not really set apart to God. We don't really sense God's presence in our lives. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of Adonai? What they're really saying is, we want to exalt ourselves. See, they didn't see what Moses and Aaron were doing as service, which is what it was.
Exactly.
They saw it as self-exultation.
Exactly.
They couldn't see what Moses and Aaron were doing in the context of who God was.
Because to be great in his kingdom is to serve.
Yes. If they could see Moses and Aaron in the context of who God was, they would see them as extremely humble men who feared God, who are so focused on just doing the right thing. They did not lift themselves up. But you strip away the context of God, then you see through Korah's eyes, oh, look at these two way up here telling us what to do.
Who do they think they are?
And again, when we don't see God in the situation, we don't see the situation.
Well, we defined ego. I think it's helpful also to define true humility. And one of my favorite definitions is when you are occupying your rightful space.
Yes.
You don't occupy less than you've been assigned or more than you've been assigned, because you know that right where you are, your life, your soul, everything you have is exactly purposed by the Creator. And so you're never listening to that voice saying, oh, you need what they have. You need to lift yourself up. It's not enough.
That's right.
More. On the other hand,
that's a spiritual mindset you just described.
And on the other hand, you're not always saying, I'm not worthy of this.
Yeah.
I need to be less. I need to just disappear and put myself over here in this corner.
Which is also ego.
So humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
Yes.
I didn't say that, C.S. Lewis did. But it's
well, Watchman Nee puts it this way.
Powerful.
Watchman Nee says, humility is not thinking of thinking highly of yourself or lowly of yourself, but not thinking of yourself at all.
And Moses obviously lived and breathed for the good of the congregation.
Right.
I
Absolutely.
mean, everything he said and did was for the people's behalf. In fact, he even goes on behalf of Korah and intervenes and says, God,
his heart's breaking.
are you gonna destroy the entire congregation over this? And here he is intervening and laying his own life down again.
Yeah. Well, you know, if Korah could see himself in the context of who God is, he could have seen Moses and Aaron in the context of who God is. But a person who doesn't truly know who they are, they don't really know who God is, they don't really know anything else. And the spiritual person, you know, as Paul says, he judges all things. In other words, he's able to assess things. Right. Because he sees them in their context and he sees them truly. You
value others and you value yourself according to what God has decided. Yes.
So it's just so clear when you've had to have run-ins with people who they call themselves believer, but they're not aware of God at all. There's just no God awareness.
Well, in humility and in a peaceful congregation, there's no such thing as competition.
No, not at all. We're part of a body.
Right.
The parts of the body don't compete against each other.
They work together.
No. But when I don't see myself as part of the body, then I see myself as the one who has to be in charge of the body or is competing against this body.
Right.
Because I see myself independent. I don't see myself in a godly context.
So poor Moses, I'm looking down in chapter 16, verse 12, and he sends a summons to these two men.
Well, if I can interject something here,
Sure.
because it's just, I'll forget it. You know, I've always wondered, what does it mean when it says Yeshua was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief?
Right.
Well, I think when we see Moses, we see a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And to understand what it means when applied to Yeshua, you look at the stuff, the nonsense Moses had to put up with, the misunderstandings, the rebellions, the whining, the complaining. It's like, okay, I get it.
Because the master himself, as you just said, was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He was perfect. He was love incarnate.
Yes.
And his message was pure. Yet he was accused of this very thing.
Yes.
The leadership of Israel accused him of putting himself up above where he should be.
Anyways, I hope I didn't get you off track.
No, let's go back to verse 12 and verse 16, because you were bringing out the meanings of the names of Dathan and Aviram.
Let's just say Dathan and Abiram.
That sounds good. So I think it's really significant if we dig a little and define who these people were.
Well, the names Dathan and Abiram, or Datan and Aviram, really define the ego. Dathan means knowledge. It comes from the word da'at, knowledge. And the soulish man always exalts in his own knowledge. And Aviram means father of heights. In other words, someone who sees themselves lifted up, people who want to be in control and want to be in charge. You know, a truly spiritual person never wants to be in charge. And when you see God picking leaders in the scriptures, he picks people who are saying, don't pick me, pick somebody else.
Right.
But Korah is the most interesting one. His name doesn't really have any particular meaning that's worth mentioning. But what is interesting, Korah is mentioned for the first time way back in Genesis chapter 36. Because there's another person in the Bible named Korah. And guess whose son he is? Here's what it says, Genesis 36, verses 5 and 6. And Oholibama, not Obama, Oholibama, bore Yeush, Yalam, and Korach. Now, Oholibama was a woman's name. Whose wife was she? These are the sons of Esau.
Wow.
These are the ones who are the sons of the one who hated Jacob, who wanted to kill Jacob, who was jealous of Jacob, who received the blessings, the gifts that Jacob brought, but hated him and was in constant competition with him. So these are the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Now this is what's interesting, the next verse. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, including Korah, his daughters and all the members of his household, his livestock, all his beasts, and all his property that he had acquired in the land of Canaan. He went into a land away from his brother Jacob.
Isn't that profound?
Yeah. So the first mention of Korah is as the son of the wicked Esau, who wanted to get as far away from Jacob as he could. And Korah's heart, though he was a leader in Israel and had these 250 loyal followers who just thought he was the bee's knees, his heart was completely out of tune with the heart of Jacob, with the heart of God, with the heart of Moses. He didn't get it at all. But boy, he looked like a leader, talked like a leader, was followed by followers. He just didn't get it because he didn't have a God context. Neither did Esau.
Well, speaking of contrasts and comparisons, my mind has been comparing our Messiah right toward the end of his ministry. His disciples are sensing that something is going to change. He's no longer going to be with them physically, but he says, don't worry, I'm sending a comforter. You're equipped to do this. You can feed these sheep. You can oversee these people and encourage them and begin to build a congregation of followers for me, for my Father. And it's so interesting that in verse 27, his message to them in 14:27 of John, he says, "Shalom, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. It's not anything the world even understands. Don't be troubled. Don't be afraid. I'm going away, but everything is fine. Be at peace." And we know that not long after he leaves them with all of this encouragement, he's tried, and then he comes back, and then he goes and he ascends, and he goes up, Grant. And I keep comparing the ascension of love incarnate, of peace, of humility, to what happens in our story next with Korah, because he personified fear and rebellion and jealousy and hate, and he literally went down. Down into the depths of the earth.
Isn't that something?
So we have Messiah Yeshua going up into the celestial heavens, beauty, perfection, and he's saying, be at peace. And here's Korah, stirring up jealousy and rebellion and everything except peace. And the earth literally opens up and swallows them up, and they disappear down.
Yeah, it says down into Sheol, which is a word for the grave.
It's amazing.
Normally you put dead people in a grave.
Well, they were dead.
But they were dead, weren't they?
They were spiritually
dead. In fact, interesting thing, I brought this out in the Parsha Seasonings teaching for this Torah portion. In 1638, that's in the English Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, it's 17:3. You know, the people, these followers of Korah, all brought their fire pans.
Right.
And a fire went out and killed them all. Just like it did Nadav and Avihu, who brought strange fire and incensed, and they shouldn't have. These 250 are following. These are disciples of Nadav and Avihu.
Yes,
they're disciples.
That's a very That's a remembering of going back to that story for sure.
In fact, Aish Zerah, which is alien fire, which is mentioned in Leviticus, that what they brought, that Aish Zerah is used also here in this passage. But anyways, that's another story. But in verse 3, 17:3 or 16:38 in the English Bible, it says, "As for the fire pans of these sinners against their souls, they shall make them hammered out sheets." Goes on.
That's a really interesting phrase.
Sinners against their souls is a Hebrew idiom for someone who commits suicide.
Wow.
For them to rebel against God's anointed, God's chosen leader, God's authority, to rebel against that is to commit spiritual suicide. And when we don't see life and everything around us in the context of who God is, we can be very prone to sin against our souls, to commit spiritual suicide.
And here's Moses talking to Aaron further down in that chapter, and he's still trying to make atonement for them.
Yeah.
Because he cares about them.
He does.
And he doesn't want death to come to these people and spread. But I also saw that people started to realize how dangerous Korah and his followers were, so they suddenly realized, back away. Don't get close.
Yeah.
And they were warned, don't touch their houses, don't be close enough that what happens to them happens to you.
Yes, get away from them. What's interesting is some of Korah's own sons were spiritual men. And they realized that what their father was doing was dead wrong.
So they were part of the group that backed away.
Backed away. And we have in the book of Psalms, I don't know, 11, maybe a dozen Psalms written by the sons of Korah.
Right.
And I think Psalm 46, Psalm 42 is one of my favorite Psalms, and it's written by sons of Korah. But Psalms 42, I'll read just the first opening verses. 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should break apart, and though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea. Though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake and its swelling pride.
So we know what they were referring to.
Yeah. When you think of the context of how their
Wow.
father Korah died. It says, we won't be afraid. Even the mountains break apart, and we're going to stand. And they did.
Well, one of the questions that comes to my mind as I read this portion is, how do we understand when leadership and controversy with leadership is a good thing or a bad thing? Because not all controversy is an indication of ego and rebellion. Healthy conversation is essential and necessary in the community of God, correct?
Yes.
There's a cool Perkei saying, that's the ethics of the fathers, and it's a really neat quote. I'm going to share it. It says, an example of a controversy for the sake of heaven is a disagreement between Hillel and Shammai, while one that is not for the sake of heaven is the argument of Korah and his followers.
Yeah.
And we know that Hillel and Shammai famously disagreed on so many things, but the reason they were disagreeing and trying to come to some kind of understanding is for the sake of the many.
Yes, trying to get to the
and
truth.
Seeking the truth for the sake of others, so that the community could be healthy. That was not Korah's heart.
No. Everything about Hillel and Shammai was trying to figure out, what does God want?
What does
Everything
he want?
about Korah was what I want. And that's a huge, huge difference.
It's such a huge difference. And when you see self-aggrandizement in a leader, be careful.
Yes.
Be careful.
Well, you ask the question, how do you deal with authority? And what you do is you appeal to it. You appeal to it.
Right.
And sometimes, if I'm not sure authority is right, I found the safest thing, until I know clearly that it is wrong, is still to submit to it.
And respect.
And respect it. And if people do that, out of a fear of God, God will correct that authority or remove it or change it. He'll fix it. Or he'll make it clear, it's time to remove yourself from this authority. It's time. Like Korah's sons. Their father rebelled against Moses' authority, but Korah's son stepped away from his. They said, we're not going to go down with it.
That's so important.
Because they had a healthy fear of God, and because they could see Moses and Aaron in the context of who God was, they knew their father was wrong, and they could step aside. They didn't rebel against their father, they didn't condemn him, but it's like, we're not going to participate in this, and their lives are spared.
So there's a time and a place.
There's a time and a place. So what does godly authority look like? I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like what we see in chapter 18. It looks like a dead piece of wood that blossoms.
Isn't that something?
That's what spiritual authority looks like.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when the people were wondering, how do we really know who God's authority is? Moses said, all right, all you leaders of the tribes, all 12 of you, bring your staff. And the staff is just a hard, dead piece of wood. And he says, make sure your names are on them. He took them into the tabernacle, left them overnight. When he brought them out, and this is what it says. It's in chapter 17 in my Bible. It says in verse 20, it shall be that the man whom I shall choose, his staff will blossom. His staff will blossom. So everything about what he does brings forth new life.
Yeah.
It brings out beauty, fragrance, new life. And so in the morning when they brought the staves out, Aaron's staff was blossoming. And it says it had a blossom, which is beauty and fragrance. It had a bud, and that word for bud is the word zitz. It's the same name as for the golden plate on the high priest's forehead. It means to shine. There was a light to it. It shined. And it also had almonds, so they're spiritual food.
When we think of Moses and even Aaron, I know that we see that they weren't weak. They weren't men without opinions. They were strong men.
Yeah.
And humility doesn't mean quiet and weak and meek even. I was reading a little bit more about healthy leadership this week because it plays into this conversation, and I believe that it's important to realize that when there is a strong leader, it's always the leadership that is making strong, decisive choices for the good of the entire people.
Yeah.
And I love this sentence. Humility is the redemption of ambition. Isn't that great?
Yes.
It doesn't
I love
mean
it.
that you have no ambition for the group or even for your own life. What it means is it's not about you.
It's not about me.
And by directing one's striving towards something larger than the self and anchoring a pursuit of excellence in a sense of responsibility to the greater whole, that is greatness.
Yes.
That is greatness. And it's always, always accompanied by people who don't understand and are going to accuse and discourage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely.
It always is.
And you know, Korah and his followers made a lot of noise, didn't they?
They were so noisy.
How noisy is a staff that's blossoming and bearing fruit?
It's just being what it is.
It's silent. Yeah. You know, you wonder then, well, why was it almonds? Why not acorns or apples or pineapples or something like that? What is it about almonds? Well, you know, the menorah, when you just read about it, it talks about it having the parts of it in each lamp, and it refers to the almond, like almond clusters, almond blossoms, that each one gave light. But if you take the Hebrew word for almond, which was shaked, shin, kof, dalet, just move the first letter to the end, it becomes the word kadosh, holy.
Wow.
And so almonds are kind of a picture of holiness. So his rod, again, it says right there in my Bible, it's chapter 17, verse 23, it brought forth a blossom. That's Korach, which is beauty and fragrance. It sprouted a bud, zitz, which really means to shine.
And that really is a picture of humility.
It is. And almonds, shakdim, which is a fruit. It brings food and nourishment. And these things just quietly come out of the one who God chooses to lead.
Well, that leads me to a summarizing quote.
All right, good, because we need to summarize.
We need to summarize, and nobody better than Rabbi Sachs.
Oh, yes.
And here's what he said about humility. He says, humility is more than just a virtue. It is a form of perception, a language in which the I is silent so that I can hear the thou, the unspoken call beneath human speech, the divine whisper within all that moves, the voice of otherness that calls me to redeem its loneliness with a touch of love. Humility is what opens us to the world.
Isn't that great? Yeah. Well, God promises to reduce the proud to rubble, to bring them down.
He resists the
to
proud.
humble them. Yeah,
And
but
he favors the humble.
Humble yourself in the eyes of the Lord, and in due time He will raise you up. So if you want to be elevated, as Korah accused Moses of being, how do you get elevated? You humble yourself in the eyes of the Lord.
That's how we climb the ladder. That's how we
That's
ascend.
how we go up. Yeah, the proud and egotistical need not apply. Huh? All right. Well, we have a double portion next week. We
Okay.
barely squeezed one in this week, but it's Kukat and Balak next week. So we'll have to roll up our sleeves and get ready for that one.
Thank you for spending this time with
Yes.
us. We enjoyed this conversation, and shalom.
Shalom to all of you. God bless.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member. celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.